Good evening. The clocks all say different times in here, but mine says 1:30, so we'll start. Welcome everybody to this executive meeting this evening. First of all, I'd like to ask for any apologies. I have one from Oliver Whittle. Do I have any more? No, thank you very much indeed. And first of all, we'll go to the minutes of the previous meeting on pages 7 to 20. Does anyone have any amendments?
Extremely minor one, but on page 10 under 18.3, the second paragraph of my answer, it says in the last couple of years, and I have been in regular contact with the senior management of Persimmon. We as a council, not I personally.
Thank you very much. Any others? No, okay. Can I ask members then to approve the minutes, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 25 is the declaration of interest. Does anyone have any declarations? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Next item, item 26, public question time. A period of 30 minutes is allowed for this. The first question is item 26.1, and it's a question from Kevin Morgan, and it's a question for Councillor Mark Ashworth. Okay, we can send a written answer back out. Okay, the next question is 26.2, and that's a question from Keith Morgan. I'm sitting here, so would you like to come forward and ask a question for Councillor Norman Wallington?
Right. Thanks very much. My question runs as follows. I've emailed you twice to ask about the decision-making around the proposed relocation of Wokingham Library, but I'm asking this question as I have had no response. In considering this issue, did you look at the impact assessment that has a plan that fails to show the full location of the existing library and adjacent parking? In the relocation engagement feedback, there were no comments supporting the move, and no responses were made to customers who criticised the move. To a comment about there being existing plans for the current library site to be sold for residential purposes, there is no response. How can any rational decision be made with these questions unanswered?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. The decision to relocate Wokingham Library to the Carnival Phase 2 site when it opens in 2021 was taken because of the many benefits it provides to the people who regularly make use of the services and the potential to increase its usage by locating the library with the new leisure centre and the wider Elmsfield development. The issues and questions surrounding the proposed relocation have been explored extensively by the Council through the large number of questions submitted to the Executive at its March 2017 meeting, subsequent call-in to the Scrutiny Committee of the decision, and through the range of engagement activities that publicised the proposals and encouraged feedback. Within these considerations, the current location and adjacent parking were reviewed and considered in detail. The executive report and the impact assessment made clear reference to the advantages of the new site being on one level and to access to the library, including the access from the new car park also being both flat and level. Despite the number of press releases, press articles and engagement activities about the proposed relocation, the number of actual responses and comments was very low. This is in stark contrast to the library consultation that was conducted last year, where a large number of respondents from the Wokingham town area expressed their support for the co-location of libraries with leisure and other popular services. Finally, I would like to confirm that there are no existing plans for how the existing Wokingham Library site will be used after the relocation in 2021. Thank you.
That's a very interesting answer to some of the points that I raised. I think you're confirming basically that the report that was presented, I think under the name of Mark Redfern, was read by the person you didn't read by yourself. You didn't specifically refer to the fact that my problem was that report was deficient in a number of ways, i.e. the map was not complete. You've made no response in your decision about the site. My concern is a general concern about the way the Borough Council makes decisions. I don't have to mention Graiseley again, but I do think...
do you have a supplementary question?
I have a question which is basically going to end up with a question of secrecy, which is, and I will get round to it because you already raised that same subject. This council has a reputation of secrecy. We need to talk about Graiseley. Wokingham town councillors and local councillors were advised about the Wokingham Library.
Sorry, may I remind you again, it's a supplementary question, not a new question. It should relate to the question that you asked.
It does relate, absolutely. If I can
it
refer
should be
you...
a question, not a statement.
Just to make it clear to you, the last part of my question refers to the site. Has the site been sold for residential? This is in response to a consultation, with which there weren't enough, and I could agree completely with that. There was no response made in the report that I've referred to about this. So now that's why I want to raise the question of secrecy with regard to this. Because at your last executive, you considered a report about a property adjacent to the regeneration sites, which is a property which is council was going to commit to £1.75 million, widely believed to be Marks and Spencer's, but I can't say that. What I want to know is, subsequent to this decision being made, surveyors were seen on site, on this particular site, and I want to understand whether there is any specific plans for this site, bearing in mind council's history.
Okay, you've asked your question, and I think it was actually answered in the first part of the question. At the moment, for the current site where the library already exists, there are no current plans for that site. Thank you.
How long do I have to wait?
Well, there are no current plans at this time.
Hmm?
There are no current plans for that site at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, on to the member question time. The first question is 27.1, and that's Councillor Gary Cowan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the question in my name, and I'll sit down while I wait for the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. We recognise the important contribution that parish and town councils can bring to the planning process, and we will be actively engaging with them and the borough councillors in the site assessment work, which will form part of the local plan. Last year we wrote to all parish and town councils asking for their input on all the sites promoted by landowners. We will shortly be starting to engage with them on our initial assessments. And just to expand upon that, the intention is we will batch those sites up into wards. To those meetings we will invite a representative of the parish council again, and the relevant ward members. Will be totally open to all those people to look at the initial assessments that are being done. The report on the local plan update confirms the wish for early engagement. Making supplementary funds available will support detailed analysis on engagement. Okay?
Do you have a supplementary?
Yes. On the 2nd of September in 2005, which was 12 years ago, when I was the executive member responsible for planning, I made the following statement to the local press. The government will foist housing numbers upon us, and there is no doubt that there is a need for some, including affordable houses. But this must be set against proper infrastructure, etc., etc. And I said it was a tall order, at least for the Conservatives, will do the best to deliver. How can you promise that you will not let the residents down on this issue?
It's a very difficult thing to promise, but I can assure you and I can assure the residents that we are doing our level best in that. We are currently fighting off appeals in inappropriate locations, because under the current system that we have, as I'm sure you're aware, Gary, because you were one of the ones who, or the main one to bring all of that forward, we had infrastructure with the 4 locations. The infrastructure
with hindsight, we could have possibly brought it forward sooner. If it had been possible, we didn't have the money to do it at that point. We haven't collected the contributions from the developers. But we will be looking within this new period up to 2036 to make sure that we have proper infrastructure on those sites, whilst at the same time having to fend off these characters called developers.
The next question, 27.2, is a question from Councillor Angus Ross for the Executive Member for Environment, Councillor Rawls.
Thank you, Chairman. This is in parallel with the concerns about Grenfell and the question about solar panels. The question standing in my name.
Thank you very much, Angus. The Building Research Establishment, which is carrying out work under contract for government, is conducting tests on the cladding after the Grenfell Tower blaze. They're also examining instances of solar panels catching fire and is due to report initial findings at an industry meeting this week. On receipt of the advice and recommendations of the report, our property people will instigate necessary inspections and risk assessments on our properties.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary?
If I might, just in parallel with this, just to ask if there has been good joint working with the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service post-Grenfell inspections, and obviously working on the solar panels, and contact with residents, which jointly has been done, recognising that this borough doesn't have any high-rise buildings.
Certainly, I think as you're aware, the Council collaborates very closely with all its partners, including the Fire and Rescue Service, on all the emergency arrangements across Berkshire, meeting very regularly, and I think even this week there is a practice with the Fire Service on some of those emergency arrangements, so yes, working very closely with them.
Thank you. The next question is 27.3. It's a question from Councillor Shepherd-Bay, and it's a question from the Leader of the Council, but I'm going to direct it to Charles because as it's side to.
I'll ask the question standing in my name.
Thank you. We want to support all councillors in their role as 21st century councillors, and we're considering at the moment how we implement the new technology and the benefits associated with this. There are active conversations between councillors and officers at the moment to understand the usage, what members require, and this is a subject for the IT working group, of course, which you are a member. No final decision has been reached, and the outcome will depend on the feedback from councillors, the working group, the capabilities of the system, and the data protection issues.
You allow the councils to use Office 365 instead on their own machines for access to all of the 21st Century Council.
Okay, that is the system as it stands, but as per what we've been discussing at the working group, no final conclusion has been made on this, and this is ongoing. We have obviously the member training sessions in September, when obviously there's going to be a process of review that comes from that, and it will be brought forward to the working groups for all members to contribute to.
Thank you. The next question, 27.4, is a question from Councillor Imogen Shepherd-Bay and asking the Executive Member for Highways and Transport, Councillor Chris Barron.
Hello everybody.
Good evening.
The bus stops in Broad Street Woking have extremely low, shallow curbs and do not have the raised curbs that are required by disability groups. This means that there are many people with mobility problems that cannot use bus services to get into town. There are many castle curbs being installed around Wokingham, but not in the most important place, that being Broad Street in the centre of town, or anywhere close enough to be of use. When are we likely to see castle curbs being installed in Wokingham town centre?
Thank you, Imogen, for your question. Due to the footpath constraints and the threshold levels of neighbouring buildings, unfortunately it is not feasible to install the castle curbs at the current bus stops in Broad Street, unlike the majority of other town centre bus stops. The Council are aware this is not ideal, especially for disability groups, and will consider options to provide improved access as part of any regeneration of Broad Street. These options may include the relocation of the Broad Street bus stops if step-free access cannot be accommodated at the current locations, subject to consultation, of course. In the meantime, whilst the buses can kneel, which helps to reduce the step to the curb, each bus is also equipped with a ramp which the driver can deploy to enable those with restricted mobility to board and alight the vehicles more easily. If residents are having trouble alighting and boarding buses, they should mention this to the driver and ask that the ramp is deployed.
Do you have a supplementary?
I sort of do, yes. Certainly in terms of the ramp being deployed, the feedback I'm getting, because that was the first thing I said when this was asked of me, is that the bus drivers won't deploy them unless you have a wheelchair, and even for wheelchair users the ramp is quite steep on Broad Street because it's very low. But essentially, I mean, it's not just for, Kessel curbs are not just for the people with disabilities, it's for people with luggage, for people with shopping trolleys and all sorts of things who need to get on the bus, and prams. Basically, the Equalities Act in 2010 required the local authority to show they're eliminating discrimination and advancing equality in all of their areas. What are we doing with the highways respect to further that aim?
Well, I would have thought this was in, what we're trying to do was in accordance with the Equalities Act. But as I explained to you, we can't do something if it's physically impossible, and that does appear to be the case in Broad Street at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Next on to the substantive agenda items. Item 28, which is the revenue monitoring for 2017 to 18, quarter 1, June 2017, and it's on pages 21 to 30. And I'm going to pass over to Charles Maggetts.
Thank you. So revenue monitoring first, which starts on page 21, and the executive is asked to note the position of the revenue budget and forecast balance in respect of the general fund, housing revenue account, schools block and the investment portfolio. The table on page 22 of the minutes shows the end of year position with no overspend, demonstrating our effective management of the budget.
Do any members have any questions? Great, and second part of the recommendation is no carry-forwards either. So may I ask for a show of hands for those in favour of noting this report? Very much indeed. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item 29. It's the capital monitoring 2017 to 2018 end of June report for 2017. And again, I'm going to pass over to Councillor Charles Maggetts.
Thank you. So capital monitoring, which starts on page 31, the executive is asked to note the capital monitoring report as set out in Appendix A, and to approve and note that the overall value of the 2017-18 capital programme has increased due to the additional ring-fence grants and contributions, the schools formula devolved grant £11,000, the Homes and Communities Platform for Life programme £304,000, and a grant from Wokingham Town Council for environmental improvements in the town centre to match fund the project up to 650k. And final point, quarter 1 of the capital monitoring report shows no variance from the budget.
Any questions or queries? No? Okay. Just to note, I think an important part of this report on page 32, the Housing and Communities Agency have given us a grant for £304,000 to support the housing that we're building to support care leavers into their important journey into independent living. I think this is really good news. And other than that, just to ask executive members to approve this report. Thank you very much. Next is the agenda item number 30, and this is the Treasury Management Outturn Report for 2016-17. And again, Councillor Charles Maggetts.
Thank you. Treasury Management Outturn Report on page 37 onwards. The Executive is asked to note that the report was presented to the Audit Committee on the 13th of June and approve and recommend to the Council. I think key things to pull out of this, the overall the housing revenue account repaid an external loan of £3.5 million. Return on investments, internal and external companies was 1.3 million instead of the 1.2 million projected. There is an additional loan which WBC took to complete Bowhunt School, and this will be repaid by SIL. Total debt is now 147 million on an average interest rate of 3.32. This borrowing is obviously to fund the regeneration of the town centre and the other capital programmes which the WBC is committed to across the borough. No borrowing at all is to support revenue expenditure, and all borrowing is within Treasury limits, and repayment will be covered by income from those areas.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, the recommendation is on page 37. Does everyone approve this report? Thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda is item 31. It's the local plan update, options development, and it's pages 67 to 94. And that's Councillor David Lee.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment on actually the two items, agenda item 31 and 32, if I may, please. Just to actually paint a picture of it for you. We're currently updating our local plan, and nothing in life, unfortunately, is simple. So, despite being an authority that complies with local need and national requirements, we are being distracted from this job by unscrupulous developers who are submitting unsustainable sites and not complying with the local plan update by submitting sites to be considered through the formal process. Our housing land supply position is under attack from these developers through appeals, and planning inspectors currently seem to have licence to cumulatively increase our housing need with no evidence, and reduce the estimated delivery supply, which actually affects our housing requirement, with little or no evidence to support their findings. Housing in unsustainable locations without planned infrastructure is therefore now being allowed by these appalling appeal decisions. To counter this, we are releasing, hopefully tonight, the reserve sites included within our current local plan to improve our 5-year land supply and better defend against these inappropriate locations from developers whose only concern is the profit to be gained from building in unsustainable and unsuitable locations. We as a council are lobbying government on these appeal decisions, where developers argue our housing requirement numbers up due to slower than expected delivery and affordability, which is a rather strange thing. It is your council's contention that the slowness of delivery is in the hands exclusively of developers. We have granted over 12,000 planning approvals. Delivery is entirely down to the developers. It is beyond me that inspectors who punish us for this slowness can be said to understand the reality that exists here in this borough. And with regards to affordability, it is the developers who inflate their prices at every stage of development. We cannot control either these prices or the delivery, but yet inspectors find consistently in the favour of developers. We as elected representatives must be able to manage in an orderly fashion where and when development occurs and mitigate the consequences of such planned development. And I would go back to the question asked by Councillor Cowan, who, through excellent work, made sure that we got infrastructure along with other colleagues under this current plan. We have been able to achieve within the current local plan this because we have enabled sustainable developments, infrastructure-rich communities. This includes 1 brand new secondary school, 7 primary schools, 5 major roads, new bridge across the M4, 2 new bridges across railway lines delivered to date. However, such inappropriate current developer applications prevent us from bringing forward well-managed and sustainable development. We are currently updating our local plan to 2036, and developers who are not delivering as they said they would are arguing for unsustainable sites, winning an appeal, which is resulting in a thing called land banking at our residents' expense, and shows very clearly their total lack of concern for our community. A key input to this local plan update is to establish what land may be available for new housing, jobs and other uses such as leisure and development. In 2016, the Council made a call for potentially suitable sites. This resulted in over 260 being submitted. We are now carrying out an analysis of these sites, and as I said earlier in my answer to Gary, those sites will be looked at with the ward members and representatives of the parish council. This analysis requires each site to be assessed for its sustainability in terms of housing, community facilities, transport, including requirements for new roads and railway stations. The additional funding, if approved tonight, will facilitate this detailed work. It is your Council's objective to meet our assessed housing requirements in an orderly fashion, as was carried out under the previous plan, despite these land banking proposals, and we will continue to argue our situation at the highest levels and fight these inappropriate applications. And I would be delighted to have any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Do we have any questions? Councillor Weeks.
Thank you, David. Since you covered both 31 and 32, my question really relates to 32. I presume you want to take those together?
I'll take questions for 32 when we get
Okay, right, I'll bide my time.
Councillor Ashwell.
Thank you, David. That was very good, actually. I enjoyed that. Are we still on target to produce our local plan by sort of 2019, 2020 is my question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Or sooner, if possible.
Which would be brilliant.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, great.
Sorry, just before you can do that, may I say, please, that we carry out a survey of new residents, the new home survey, and just to show the benefits of actually having a proper structured plan in place, and not for people who just, their only aim is to make a maximum amount of money and don't care about the consequences. But 84% of our new residents are satisfied with their new home, and that compares to 80% in 2016. Not everything is perfect, but generally people who are moving into the area are happy with the work that we have put together to make sure the infrastructure is there. We haven't completed all the infrastructure yet, but quite a bit of it is. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you've heard, through the local plan update, we've had over 260 sites that have been submitted for review. It's going to take a huge amount of work to look through those, and the detailed bit of work we'll look through to see whether the sites are sustainable, whether they're deliverable, and see if there are any opportunities that present themselves to group some sites together, and see whether sites meet the needs for housing, jobs, sports, leisure, and infrastructure, etc. And also within this report, which I think is very helpful on page 73 to 93, you've also got out the consultation responses as well. Whilst there's a fairly low number of consultation responses, I think it's helpful that there's some out in the report. So it just leads me to the recommendations that are set out here. The first one is to approve a supplementary estimate of £400,000 to support the site assessments process for the local plan update, and number 2, to note the update process. I see hands for those who approve this. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. The next agenda item this evening, David's already given a bit of an introduction, but it's item 32, and it's on pages 95 onwards, and it's the housing land supply and reserve sites. And I'll pass over to Dave.
I've given, I think, my introduction today, but can I just point out one thing on page 102, please? The fourth item down, land at Valley Nurseries, and just to sort of update you on this, there was it says in the right-hand column, there was a full application for 16 dwellings which was refused in December 16. An appeal was submitted at the beginning of March this year, and all written exchanges were completed. And PINS, and for those who don't know what PINS are, it's our friends from Bristol, the inspectors. We're moving towards an imminent decision on this appeal. A decision has been held in abeyance by the inspectors until the end of this month, pending the outcome of this executive report at the request of both the council and the appellant. An application for cost has also been made by the appellant. And the reason for that is it seems to be not very sensible to continue with that when we are hopefully releasing these sites. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Weeks, do you have a question?
Yep. Yeah? David, am I correct in saying that in calculating the need, the inspectors don't actually look at the size of the properties that we are building, they look at just simply the number of units, and would ask that we look as far as possible to boost the number of smaller properties that are built. because there's clearly a strong local demand for those, particularly amongst younger people trying to get into the housing market.
Well, the answer to that is yes, but I can also confirm that we are also looking at other items to help younger people start, such as self-build and actually providing truly affordable houses for sale.
Councillor Mark Ashmore.
Thank you, Chair. David, I mean, obviously the Stanbury Appeal judicial review decision was excellent news, but do you think that this sort of tranche of sites that we're releasing are going to be enough in the short to medium term, or do you think we're going to need to look at more?
Well, I think that we need to look at sites which actually fit into our current planning policies in a sustainable location. We need to have as many weapons as possible to defeat these land grabbers. Some of whom, of course, the sites are being put forward by people who live in the borough, who have sometimes in the past complained about this awful thing of building in my back garden until it's offered, the developer offers them it. So we're doing our best to stop people getting all the gain and none of the pain. Thank you.
Any other questions? I just want to say that I think, building on what David and Simon have been talking about, obviously Mark, I think it is disappointing that we are at this stage in our local plan already and having to bring forward our reserve sites, because we already have 12,000 permissions for houses that have not yet been built. And the planning policy of this government and successive governments does not recognise permissions already granted. And if it did, we would have enough houses in the pipeline for the next 13 years if you take account of the housing need at 894 homes, which is what planning inspectors have suggested we should be delivering every year. Or we would have 14 years if you calculated it by the SHMA numbers. So what we need to be doing is to continue to lobby our MPs, our local MPs and central government ministers for change to dissuade developers from land banking, which only increases the prices of houses for our residents. We need to keep lobbying our MPs and ministers to take a new approach to assessing housing needs that does not punish authorities like ours that are delivering homes and infrastructure, as we have done all the right things by producing a local plan in 2010, and we are now looking to adopt in the future a new local plan. But it does feel somewhat premature to be going out to create a new local plan when this existing local plan that we created in 2010 still has not run out in terms of date. So I just wanted to put it on record that I feel that it is disappointing that we're having to do this, which feels very premature when we already have 12,000 outstanding permissions already granted. So it just leaves me to the recommendations, which are on page 95. The Executive is advised to note the current five-year housing land supply position. Number 2, approve the release of the allocated reserve sites to boost housing supply in the short term. And 3, approve the invitation of an application on land south of Cutbush Lane. I look to members to approve this. Thank you. Okay. The next item is item 33, which is the Woking Borough Secondary School Strategy on page 105 to 138. And over to Councillor Mark Ashwell.
Thank you, Chair. This strategy is for the next 3 years, 2017 to 2020-21, and it provides a master plan to ensure future demand for secondary school places is met. And it's specifically designed to dovetail into our local plan updates. Hence my question of David earlier. Thank you. Its aim is to ensure there are sufficient places in good or outstanding secondary schools for children living in the Woking Borough Council area. And there's currently a surplus of places in secondary schools as a whole, but the strategy sets out contingency plans if the numbers rise. And the core issues that we talk about, or we calculate from, are the current school capacity, the number of places projected to be required by schools moving up from our primary schools, children moving up from our primary schools, and an influx of children living on new housing developments. And also the impact of cross-border movement of pupils into Wokingham schools who do not live in Wokingham, and also the movement the other way. And that's sort of highlighted on page 116, and there's a very simple equation there that sums that forecast need up. The blueprint shows that we may need an additional Year 7 places from 2019-20, which we are pretty sure we can manage within surplus capacity, but it also considers the longer term requirement for secondary school places beyond that period. The demand for places continues to increase, and the strategy aims to ensure that every child has the opportunity to attend a local school. So I commend you this very well written strategy, even though I say so myself, and I ask you to approve, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any questions or queries?
Thank you.
No? I think this should be an easier paper in terms of it's easier to project numbers for secondary school places than it is for primary. And, so hopefully it should all work. And there was the previous the secondary school strategy, which delivered both on. So I wish you every success with this secondary school strategy into living in places. So.
Thank you very much, and for your work as my predecessor. Thank you.
Well, thank you for continuing. So the recommendation is on page 105. The executive approved the Working Borough Secondary School Strategy 2017 to 2020 as appended. Members, do you approve? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Next item on the agenda is item 34, which is the Health and Safety Annual Report, pages 139 to pages 148, and that's Councillor Williamson.
Thank you very much. This report covers Woking Borough Council internally and does not address the borough more widely. Council and companies are responsible for their own health and safety and so are not included in this report. I just point out that we're not obliged to produce this report, but choose to do so to set an example and be transparent. Overall, our health and safety performance for 2016-17 can be viewed as positive. Many of the incidents that we note are things like slips and trips. Just to give a couple of examples of things that unfortunately have happened. There was a reported incident where a council tenant sustained a fractured hip in a fall on uneven paving. Action has been taken to fix the paving and improve our processes for prioritisation of repair work. There was also a reportable incident from a school where a teaching assistant fell in a zoo car park while supervising an educational visit and fractured an ankle. So incident reporting overall is up, which I view and the Council views as positive because it allows trends to be identified and prevention measures to be introduced and adopted. So the recommendations are on page 139.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or queries? No? Okay, in which case, as noted, the recommendations are set on page 139. The recommendation is to note the corporate health and safety performance of 2016-17 and endorse the approach described and the health and safety priorities for the current municipal year. All those approved? Thank you very much indeed. And lastly, item 35, Peach Place Residential.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually asking for this paper to be withdrawn this evening and not debated to allow further work. There's some inconsistent and incorrect data in the pink pages, and also there's one or two typos which weren't spotted, so we're not going to be debating that tonight.
Thank you very much indeed. And that brings us to the end of our agenda this evening. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for all your questions.
Thank you.